Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Big Bros podcast. My name is Jeremy. Welcome if it's your first time joining us. Great to have you on the show. And I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Ilan. How you going, mate?
I'm good, mate. I've been sleeping quite well lately, and I know that sleeping is a massive predictor of how one will feel the next day. So I'm feeling good. How are you?
Jeez, mate. Well, you've gone straight in and hit me right in where I'm feeling most incompetent at the moment, which is my sleep, because I've had a pretty rough week. And in terms of sleep, I feel like my sleep has taken a massive hit. I've been getting way too many late nights, like going to bed way too late. And it's been affecting me a bit throughout my productivity during the week. And that's something that I need to improve on going into next week for sure. So sleep could be better for me. Great that it's going well for you. So I'm going to use that as inspiration going into next week.
Do you regret not sleeping well this week?
I do regret not sleeping well, which is why, because of that regret, I'm going to call it into action and use that regret to propel me into the next week and to bring about a change. And I think that's a lovely segue, Ilan. So well done. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about regret, because as you can see from the title, regret is the theme for this week, episode 38, all about regret. And often when we talk about regret as something we want to avoid in life. You know, people often get tattooed on their body or speak about how we should not have regrets. You know, no regrets. It's a common thing thrown around, especially in our early 20s, in our formative years. It's part of like the YOLO movement, the no regret movement. Be free, do whatever you want, no regrets. But maybe it's something that should be accepted and invited rather than strayed away from, because as the science says, everyone experiences regret unless you're a baby or a sociopath or someone with brain damage. Everyone experiences regret. So unless you fall into this category, we all have regrets. We're all human. So let's invite it and let's accept it.
I mean, regret is the most common negative emotion humans talk about. It's even the second most common overall emotion, which we talk about after love, which is really interesting to even hear. And yet our relationship with it is pretty poor. I feel like you just said it before, this whole YOLO movement of dismissing regret and refusing to almost absorb it and take a lesson from it. I feel like maybe modern society's problem with regret is almost that of like, let's dismiss it because it's a negative feeling and not learning from it. And I think that's why when you ask most people, do you have any regrets? They'll be quick to say, well, yeah, I actually don't have regrets because I've learned from them. And make of that what you will. Like, I don't actually have an issue with someone saying that, but I feel like regret, and we'll get into this, is truly powerful, and its true capabilities are sought after when you actually use it to your advantage and you use it as a teacher. Because as we know, it can improve our decision making, our problem solving skills, and it can also just enhance our sense of meaning on this earth.
Without a doubt. And those are all three factors that, you know, when thinking about regret, first and foremost, we don't think about it, because those are things that relate to, I guess, the long-term approach to dealing with regret. You know, decision making, looking into the future, how we're going to improve from what we're feeling. Whereas when we first look at regret and talk about regret and feel regret, it's always what is instantaneous. What am I feeling immediately right now? How is it affecting me right now? And we've spoken in previous weeks about doing certain actions that might be pretty crappy and feel a bit hard and challenging in the short term, but might provide long-term benefit and long-term growth. And regret is one of those things that falls into that category where in the short term, you might feel that sense of, gosh, I feel awful doing this, or what I've done has not really maybe aligned with me or has gone against what I would typically do or how I would typically act. But it might provide you with some long-term benefit and something of substance looking ahead, and, you know, enhance your character and enhance your decision-making skills. So it's funny how these things collide, and how, you know, long-term goals, short-term hardship can tie in to regret. with, because it is something that we often think about as something so immediate and something that we're feeling right now and not thinking about when thinking about the future.
Yeah, I guess we'll get into it soon, but like there's the regret of action versus inaction. But I want to touch on that a bit later. I want to actually talk about why we feel regret. And as the in-house evolutionary psychologist of this show...
Go on, self-proclaimed.
I'm taking the absolute mickey there because I'm definitely not. I'm not qualified. I'm not a researcher. But my love of evolutionary psych got me to actually research why... Is there an evolutionary advantage to being able to feel regret? Because if it's a pervasive feeling that we experience, second after love, then what would be the advantage of experiencing it? And it says that if our distant ancestry regretted dropping a rock on their foot or losing their mate to a rival, they would learn to make better future decisions that were more likely to ensure their survival and reproductive success.
Makes perfect sense. Absolutely perfect sense.
So it's almost like teaching us, avoid previous bad situation where rock drop on my foot.
Exactly.
Where I can't run from tiger because I might die, which is like really cool. I love dumbing it down because it's the way I understand it.
That's what it is. Like sometimes it's not so deep as we think it might be. It's something potentially bad has happened and it's going to stray you from acting that way and feeling that sense of pain in the future, which is a positive thing.
And what's interesting? We often think that emotions can cloud our rational judgment, which it can in a lot of ways, but under the guise of regret, there was a study from the University of Southern California where they found that the role of regret in decision making is quite interesting, such that emotions, rather than not necessarily interfering with our ability to make rational decisions, can in fact nudge us towards behaving even more rationally. And it's true. It's usually when we know we need to do something or we need to behave somewhat differently, it's not usually the cognitive element that drives us, it's the emotional impulse.
Yeah, it's that battle between the head and the heart. And I know you and I, we caught up the other day, we went on a nice walk, and that was actually something that we spoke about. We spoke about the head and the heart and how we often feel like we act based on our heart and our emotion. But sometimes, the head is there to tell us what's right from wrong. And just like anything, I feel like it's a marriage between the two, and a marriage between the two, which is what will get you the best results. And maybe not necessarily the best, but I think what's right for you in making decisions and acting certain ways, not completely going with your heart and emotions, but also your head, which tells you what might be right from wrong and steer you in the right direction.
It's a bit of good cop, bad cop. Your heart's a bit of that good cop, like, let's do what we want to do. And your head's like, nah, we got to be a little bit more calculated with what we do.
For sure.
We both want to maximize the interests of the individual. But yeah, it's kind of interesting in and of itself. All right. So when speaking about regret, it's a very broad term. So some people ask, okay, will I regret not doing something or will I regret doing something? And most of the literature says that it's rather inaction rather than action that causes regret. What do you think about that?
Daniel Pink, psychologist, has done some incredible TED Talks. He's he was a guest on our favorite podcast, Modern Wisdom. He talks about this quite beautifully. He talks about how regret, and I think the most common form of regret is regret where you're not taking bold actions. It's called, I think, boldness regret. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's called boldness regret, where it's all the what ifs. What if I asked that girl out? What if I took that business opportunity? What if I took the plunge to create my own business and to create something for me? What if I went overseas and went traveling because that's something I've always wanted to do? And that's exactly that. It's that inaction rather than that action. And when you hear about people that pass away and people that have reached certain stages in their life, those are often the things that they reflect on. It's what they didn't do, those hopes and dreams that they always had in their minds, but they just never quite actualized. And might not have actualized for a number of different things. Maybe they felt held back financially, or because of family or love, or who knows what it might be. But it's those deep core desires that they once had and still do have potentially on their deathbeds that gives them their most regret, the inaction rather than the action that they did take. Because often when you hear about people that actually took those actions in life and took those plunges into businesses or to asking that girl out or whatever it might be, they won't have the regret. You know, things might not have gone that way for them, might not have been favorable for them. Maybe they failed in their business, maybe they got rejected by that girl, whatever it might be, but they don't regret doing it because it was a lesson learned.
Yeah, it's interesting because in psychology there's this concept of your actual self, your ideal self, and your ought self. So your actual self is essentially just who we are as individuals. It's what we do on a daily basis. Your ought self relates to the person we believe we should be based on like societal expectations and the responsibilities and the things of duty that we must complete. For example, you know, paying your rent, being financially smart, you know, being disciplined, all the things that you would need to do just to be kind of just a responsible member of society. Not the sexy things, but the things that you do need to do. Then there's also
the mundane.
Yeah, the mundane, you could say. And then there's the ideal self, which is like a fantastical way of thinking about all the things that you wish you could be, all your goals and aspirations. It's not necessarily related to responsibilities, but it's the excitement, it's the wonder of what you can achieve. What would your best life look like? Would it be traveling around the world for your work and, you know, experiencing and having this sense of adventure? And where regret comes in here is when there's a major difference between who we are as people and our ought self and ideal self. So to expand on that, that pretty much says is that if we've got a bunch of things that we know we need to do, and there's a life that we want to create for us that's full of adventure, full of excitement, and our actual self is not living in congruence with our ideal self and our ought self, we tend to feel greater levels of regret and rumination. But it's that inaction that comes in again because we're not living in accordance or congruence with what we feel would be the most productive and the most meaningful way to live our lives. And I think that's a really interesting concept because just before you were talking about the fact that really you can learn from decisions that you've made that have been mistakes. You might not regret the action that led you down a bad path because at least you're not going to have that feeling of, well, what if, right? And we see it all the time in, like, as an example, relationships where someone will go back to their ex because they only broke up after like maybe a minor argument. And they might be like to them, look, I know that we broke up after 2 months, but you know, if we don't work through this, I'll never know. It'll be the regret of inaction. And then suppose they get back together and they're with each other, and whether they stay together or not, but assume they don't stay together, that person might not regret going back with them. They might, but they might not, purely because of the fact that they learnt. They were able to crush that voice inside of them that told them what could be, what could have been.
I think it's that fine balance between acting on things that are realistic and not acting on things just for the sake of not acting on them, you know, because I like that you brought that point up because saying that, you know, regret can often be felt through inaction could be viewed and perceived as a dangerous thing. It might cause people to do everything, you know, take drugs that they wouldn't normally take.
Well, that wouldn't be part of their ought self because that's not a very responsible thing to do.
Of course not, but you know, it might be one of those things
their
where
ideal
they think
self?
their ideal selves, where they're thinking, what if, you know, what could happen, what could be, and that just comes with, I think, maturity. It comes with being around the right people, coming from, you know, a family that hopefully steers you in the direction of right from wrong, but also doesn't restrain you from life experiences. But above all, this is where I think, like, if I think about myself personally, where I confide most in my friends that do try to get the best out of me, which is so important because that inaction point is a really dangerous one because it can lead to peer pressure, perhaps. It can lead to you doing unfavorable things that you would never do, that are completely out of character. So when thinking of decisions and thinking of opportunities and hopes and dreams and desires, we mentioned it last week on our Grass is Greener episode. Maybe give yourself 24 to 48 hours if it's something that you're truly pondering about whether you want to take action and do a certain thing. Because if you come back to it rather than acting impulsively in that moment, you might have a more clear view on the situation and on the action that you might want to take or might not want to take. And that'll hopefully give you a bit more of a calculated perception into whether you should act upon this, because ultimately it needs to be realistic action. It can't just be action for the sake of avoiding inaction.
What's interesting there is you've made the point that just because you might have that impulsive urge of doing something and you do something that could potentially be dangerous because you've got that impulse, might be quite dangerous. Shit, keep saying dangerous a lot, eh? This is where I think it might be quite useful to look at what are the most common regrets.
Yeah.
And the top 5 regrets of the dying was a book that was published by a palliative care nurse. And I think we've mentioned it quite a few times on this podcast, but I think they're really, really, really valuable insights to have when speaking about regret, because most people tend to regret the big things, the big macro impacts, or rather the big things in their life that they decided not to do. So without further ado, here are the top 5 regrets of the dying. The first one being is, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Interesting. Again, a bit of inaction going on there. The inaction of not living a life true to oneself. And that's really does sound like to me a person who was so concerned about social comparison. You know, you're too concerned about what others want you to do rather than living a life that you want. And that pain of not wanting to take that courageous step where you do something you want because you might risk burning the relationships around you.
Exactly.
Even in an older age, you come to the conclusion, well, did it even matter? Because I wasn't even happy. Second one is that I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And I think that's to do with the fact that most people realize that, yeah, work's important, but the most other important thing in our life are the relationships around us. And if we sacrifice time with our friends, with our families, to do mundane work for someone that doesn't care about us like our family and friends do, you kind of think back, well, you know, this is time I could have gotten away with not doing as much work and having a more fulfilling relationship. Yeah,
which relates to point number 4 we see here, which is that they wish they had stayed in touch with their friends. Not working so hard, not being so driven by what others had expected of them, but rather doing the things that they wanted to do, and that being in touch with their friends, being in touch with their true desires. What are the simple things that make life worth living?
And you know what's interesting? Number 3 is, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. The fact that people can go their entire life and be so, you'd say, paralyzed by this fear of expressing how you truly feel, it's sad, because we will go our entire life and we'll go through all the cognitive and emotional effort of finding ways to not have what we want to say revealed because we're fearful of the consequences. It shows that inaction is even strong for those things.
I think that's probably the regret that is the hardest to read, and the one that I feel most sympathetic for those people that, they get to the end of their life. And look, you're not necessarily needing to get to the end of their life. There are probably people that feel that way and do feel that way throughout the duration of their life, you know, even in their early 20s or in their 50s or whatever it might be, the feeling that they can't express their feelings and say the things that they want to say, and not having the courage to do those things. I think that's one that's the hardest to read above all of them.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard one to read. I mean, I remember, although I didn't have to have the courage to do it, it's more so just the ability to express my feelings. I remember when my great grandmother, when she was, deteriorating, I always told myself, I'm not going to have any regrets if she goes now, if I at least communicate to her how much she means to me.
Yeah.
And what a, tremendous influence she had on my life. And that's why when she did pass, I had this almost sense of gratitude that I did have enough time to express those things, because the feelings that, I could have said more to this person before they passed. I could have done this and that. But most of all, I could have made them feel better,
Yeah.
My words carry action. So, obviously in a different context, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. It also mean I wish I had the courage to tell the girl in my class I really like them and I want, date them or go on a date with them. So it just shows that you're not going to regret finding out, but you'll regret
not acting.
And it's interesting because it's usually those internal feelings. It's that, the fear of what ifs that is in direct opposition. But then you kind of come to realize that the only fear is the fear itself.
Yeah, I think a beautiful way to overcome all of this is by thinking and playing by the mindset that, look, if you're not in the arena, you can't play the game. You have to actually turn up. You have to turn up and be on that football field and run out there and play the game. And that's the call to action. If you've got your walls up, if you're on the sidelines, how can you expect to find out the results? How can you be kicking those goals and feeling the celebrations, or, getting tackled and getting driven into the ground, but then feeling what it feels like to recover and get back up again? You need to be in the arena to play the game.
Remember when Nick Davis, when he kicked 4 goals or 5 goals in the last quarter into 2006, I think it was
preliminary final.
It was a prelim final against Geelong. He was getting battered and bruised, but he was crumbing everything and he won the game for them. So you're right. You need to be in the arena to play in the arena. Tell me, how can regret be a force for good?
Well, let's bring in one of our other favourites, Mr. Alex Hormozy, who has also been on Modern Wisdom. We've shouted out that show a fair bit. So we'll continue to shout that out because there's some brilliant minds on there. So if you haven't heard of Modern Wisdom, go check it out. But Alex Hormozy, he speaks about how before becoming super wealthy and before being the businessman and entrepreneur that he is, he would, sleep on gym floors. He would be noting the people that would be encouraging him to move towards his dreams and to act on his dreams. However, when he eventually became rich and things took a turn and, he busted his gut and turned those dreams into a reality for himself, he would then see that people would actually be backstabbing him or saying things like, you think you're too good for us now, type of thing. Like that type of mentality, turning that initial encouragement into denigration just because he actually actualized his dream and he achieved what he wanted to achieve. Now, how does that link to regret? Well, it links to regret because people support you on the way up. If you're at the bottom of the mountain and they're a little bit further along that journey towards the top of the mountain, they will support you to try bring you up to their level. But once you surpass them, people are starting to view you as going out there and chasing a dream. And that might be a dream that they might have for themselves that they might not have put themselves in the position to chase for themselves, or they feel like they're unable to chase for themselves. And that brings them regret. That brings them deep regret because they're seeing someone achieving the dream that they're achieving, but also the dream that they personally might want to achieve. And that regret ties in, and that's where that denigration then ties in too.
Yeah, I suppose if you see someone who does better than you and they achieve what you can't achieve, it's a reflection for you. It's pretty much a mirror to you saying, if you were actually disciplined enough, if you were able to pull your head in enough and you worked hard enough, well, you could be in the same position. And it's almost just like...
It's a reminder that you didn't get there.
Yeah, it's a reminder that you didn't get it, and it's a reminder that you fucked up. And you may have spoken a lot about how you're going to achieve that goal, but you didn't.
Yeah.
And that can be emotionally devastating for an individual, right? So it's an interesting one because I really like that story about where he was sleeping on gym floors, because
Yeah.
people are more than happy to be great to you when they're above you and they see that you're working up. It's almost like sympathy, right? It's a bit of, it's like they're not going to make it, but good on them for trying. It's cute. So you're not going to be a dick by like kicking them when they're on the ground. Well, as soon as they surpass you and they show you almost in a lot of ways they're better than you, that social comparison takes over, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's really mindful to be so aware of this in our early 20s, early to mid 20s, in our formative years, because it's the time period where we want to be changing. We want to be going through different life transitions, going through new jobs. You're meeting new people, forming new friendships and relationships. And it's so easy to be in this time period and experience people either bringing you up because they see you starting something fresh, and they see that you're going for a hope and you're going for a dream, and people around you will encourage you. But then once you start getting there, they might pull back, or they might start to denigrate, or they might start to throw in their 2 cents, and all of a sudden everyone's got an opinion. And I think it's honestly probably the most prevalent that this is something that we're going to be feeling between the ages of like 18 and 30. I feel like after those ages, you might already have a fair establishment of yourself. You might already be married or looking to get to that stage, or you're pretty settled in your job and you know what your income is, you know what your life trajectory is, or you're at least happy with where it's going. But between 18 and 30, we're still figuring it out. And there's going to be so many chefs in the kitchen, calling the shots, telling us what to do, what not to do. Everyone's got an opinion. So it's important to not ruminate on those things and focus on and confide in the people that are truly supporting you, and come back and realize the purpose as to why you're doing it. Why are you in that arena in the first place? Why do you truly want to be playing the game that you're playing?
Yeah, exactly. What action are you about to undertake that might prevent you feeling that level of regret? Because Daniel Pink talks about this, which is in order to actually use regret in a very positive way, you're better off reflecting about it rather than ruminating. Because the whole notion here is that some people tend to over-regret because they haven't been taught enough how to deal with negative emotions. That's what we spoke about before with the whole social comparison thing. Ignoring negative emotions can actually lead us to delusion. Because if you're dismissing it and you're constantly confiding in maybe this almost like a form of cognitive dissonance where, Alex Hormozy achieved all his greatness because he fucked someone over, not because he worked harder than me. That's a delusion, right? And it's not productive for you. It's not productive for anyone else. It's like what we spoke about last week with the grass is greener. And yeah, ruminating over it is also a bad idea because it'll lead us to despair. We're going to feel as though it's that external locus of control, that we can't actually control the outcomes around us. Everything that is responsible for us not achieving our goal is not anything to do with us, but rather the environment around us. So what to do?
What to do? Actually feel the emotions that you're feeling. Accept it. Accept the regret that you might be feeling. Accept that this might be a learning situation. It might be something that you can do now to give you better feelings in the future and an opportunity to not make potentially that mistake in the future and come out a better person, because that's just life. That's what being in our early 20s, in our formative years is about. It's about fucking up, and it's about feeling those fuck ups and just accepting it and feeling it, whether it is heartbreak, whether it's loss, whether it's regret or grief. These are all important emotions to feel, because if we don't feel those emotions, we're not going to appreciate the times where we're feeling the highs in life and the elations in life. Those highs and elations are we're only grateful for them, and we only truly enjoy them because we know what it feels like on the other side as well. If we were always just experiencing highs and no lows, the gratitude element to all of this wouldn't be there. We wouldn't be grateful for experiencing those highs, because we would feel like it's just a given. We would feel like things are just handed to us on a silver platter. Kind of ties into when we spoke about entitlement a few weeks ago. We'd feel like we're entitled to just always feel happy. We're entitled to be experiencing elation and enjoyment and the thrills and adventures of life all the time, because I haven't experienced the other end. I haven't experienced regret. I haven't experienced grief or loss. But when you do experience those things, it's a beautiful thing in its own way, because it's going to give you that gratitude of when things are good, and things will be good, and things will be good for you if you want them to be good. So use this opportunity of feeling regret, of feeling grief as a call to action, putting in the steps in place, like, whether it's acting on your friendships, acting on yourself, like journal writing, meditating.
Sorry to cut you off here. Writing is a massive one. Writing will get you so clear on why you feel the regret you do, because it's forcing your brain. Like, think about when you're just thinking about something. That just leads to rumination. You're thinking about, and then you forget the original thought. When you start writing it down and you literally ask yourself, why do I regret the fact that I didn't ask this girl out? And you will give yourself reasons, and you will start thinking of reasons why. I regret it because someone else asked her out and I think she's a good partner for me, X, Y, and Z. You could come up with anything, really, but you get a bit of clarity on your situation. And then Daniel Pink writes a really interesting thing about the writing aspect, which is you find and apply a systematic way to enlist that these negative emotions help us live better in the future. We recognize, as we mentioned with the whole evolutionary psych thing, why we feel like shit. And now we can put a system in place to ensure that we don't make the same mistake again. And there's another practical element. I know I cut you off, but this is a really important one, is what would you tell your friend who comes to you and tells you about a regret of inaction? And the reason I'm saying inaction is because that's going to be the most common one. It'll be rarely because of someone doing something and then fucking up over it. For example, they're not going to regret an act of courage unless it was really stupid, like they decided to, I don't know, do a stunt and jump into a bush and hurt themselves. Like, that's an idiot. But with things like being forward-looking, you get yourself to speak to your friends and you would ask almost, what would you do if a friend came to me? What sort of advice would I give?
Yeah.
Because you're going to be more objective about it.
Exactly right. You're going to... It applies with all situations, whether it's regret, whether it's, the desire to move jobs or to move out of a friendship or move out of a relationship. You're always going to... When a friend is giving you that advice, or coming to you for advice rather, you're always going to come back to the point of, well, what do you truly want to do that's best for you? What are you going to be getting out of doing this versus that? What are the pros? What are the cons? And often it'll come down to happiness. It'll come down to judging between, the head and the heart. What emotions are you feeling now? And therefore, what are the steps in place you're going to do to get there? So I like to think as going with the head as like the roadmap. What are the systematic steps you're going to put to actualize that change? And the heart is what tells you what the desire is. What is the emotion that you're feeling that either you like right now or either you don't like now? And I think discovering what it is within your heart first, listening to your emotions, feeling that emotion, feeling that grief, feeling that loss, feeling that desire to be happy is the call to action. And then the head is the moment where you put that call to action into action and you start detailing what it is you're going to do to get there. And that's going to be through a number of different ways, which we mentioned, whether it's through journal writing, whether it's through talking to certain people, whether it's through bettering yourself through fitness or through diet or through sleep or whatever it might be for you that works for you and works for the situation that you want to change and to actualize. Understanding the emotion first and then putting it into action by doing the research and doing the time is going to make all the difference. It's not just one, it's not just the other, it's a marriage between the two. And I also want to add is the importance in being patient with yourself and actually taking the time to make this a systematic process, because we feel so eager to just get results so quickly. When we feel that immediate regret, that immediate loss, we want instantaneous change. We want to feel so different in that moment, and we just want to feel happy again. We want to feel good again. But life doesn't allow us to work that way. There's always going to be curveballs. There's always going to be things, there's obstacles to work through. So just allow yourself to feel the pain or whatever it might be, and the emotion, and accept it. And once you accept it, be patient with yourself, and all will be good. I'm a big believer in that. All will be good if you put in the steps in place to make it good.
I think that's an excellent way to finish this week's episode, guys. So before we head off, if you guys enjoy this episode, why not rate us 5 stars? If you think that one of your mates would benefit from this, please do send it across to them. We hope that we can spread value in a lot of ways. And on that note, happy Tuesday, guys.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. See you next week.